The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Just as I said that I saw that Sunny is actually here. I don't know, Ruby, if you can unmute Sunny, but I was hoping we could just quickly say hi to Emily, and I'm not sure if she's here or she's with Sunny, but Ruby, if you could unmute Sunny to let us know.
Yep. Should be coming now.
Can you hear us?
Hi, Sunny.
Hi there.
If you want to just introduce everybody, let them know that Emily's joining us, go right ahead.
Sure. Many of you might be familiar with Emily's name. Emily Goligoski just joined the Open Badges team as design and community lead. In that capacity, she will be helping us, helping me with the work that you're doing during this year leading up to the conference in March. As part of that effort, she sent out an email earlier, I believe yesterday. So I will pass it over to Emily to say hi and kind of go over the email that she sent over to you guys.
Hi everyone, really excited to be here. I had, as a graduate student, had attended the DML conference for a couple of years, so I'm really looking forward to working with you all on the Mozilla Foundation end. Thank you so much for the responses to our call for badges, priorities, feedback. Anyone who's interested, I can tell you more, Emily at mozillafoundation.org. But what we're really looking to do is understand various constituents' sort of timeframes and key priorities as we think about rolling out version 1.0 of Open Badges. So any insight that you can provide is much, we're just really in a sort of an information gathering phase and really appreciate your thoughts. So thank you.
Great, thanks Emily, thank you Sunny. So Daria and Joliz, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to just share my screen.
I should also mention too that Barry Joseph is on the call as well. Barry and Denise is with BadgeStack and Learning Times. They've both been, well, Barry is he was working with badges before the competition, and for those of you on the Open Badges call, you probably had a chance to work with Barry and see some of the work that they're doing. And Denise is with Learning Times BadgeStack. So either of you, Denise or Barry, just let us know when you want to pipe in and use Chatzy or use the chat question, raise your hand, all that kind of webinar stuff if you want to participate.
Great. So thank you so much, Cheryl, and to the rest of the HASTAC team for inviting global kids to speak about our project. So as Cheryl mentioned, we are developing badging systems for both Hive New York and Hive Chicago. I've been more focused on New York, and Joliz has been more focused on Chicago. So we'll each be talking respectively about our cities. And but to start off with, I actually wanted to just share, before we get into the Learning Network details, a little bit about Global Kids badging work at a glance. So let me just go to the next slide. So Global Kids has been involved with badges in one form or another for several years now. About 4 or 5 years ago, we started a project called Digital Expressions that supported youth to recognize, talk about, and demonstrate a range of digital media skills. And this was then scaled within the New York Public Library in a program where youth were really using all sorts of social media tools, and we would badge those digital media literacies. We've also been working with several K-8 schools, supporting them to implement badging systems that align with their learning goals. So we've worked with a school in New Orleans and currently with a school in Atlanta. And we've, of course, been developing badges for internally for our own organization. And with the grant that we received from the MacArthur Foundation, we're now able to dive really deep and develop organization-wide badges for youth about global citizenship and civic engagement. And the project that we'll be focusing on today is Hive NYC in Chicago. So we're supporting 2 learning networks to develop both network-wide and organization-specific badges. So you can see examples of some of our work. On the left-hand side, you see, we've used what we call a digital transcript to talk about, being able to recognize skill, talk about a skill, and also demonstrate a skill, which are what the 3 corners stand for in this in the triangular badge. And this is a transcript that's currently being used by the Epstein School in Atlanta. And so the school identified the skills that were important for them to badge, and they've been using the system within their 7th and 6th grade class. And on the right side is something we developed in conjunction with the American Museum of Natural History. It was their Urban Biodiversity Network project, and we helped to create badges about scientific literacies, as you can see on the right-hand side, urban ecologist badge, a biodiversity badge, field assistant badge, and for that we were using another system called iRemix. So those are just two quick examples of what we've done within Global Kids. So Cheryl mentioned that not everybody might be familiar with shifting gears to the Hive learning networks, and so just very briefly, what is the Hive Learning Network? So the Hive Learning Network is really, it brings together a bunch of community and civic and cultural institutions. And what these institutions have in common is using digital media for their youth to explore their own interests. And so, in New York, I think there's about roughly 40 organizations that are part of the network. And if you're interested in learning more, you can visit their website or also the New York specific blog, which is explorecreateshare.org. Currently, there are 2 sites within the Hive Learning Network, and that's in New York City and in Chicago, but they also have plans to have Hive Learning Networks in other cities as well. And of course, the entire thing has been funded by MacArthur Foundation. So through a grant that Global Kids received from the MacArthur Foundation, what are our scope and goals for the network? So I guess actually even taking a step back before we get into our scope, just to tell you a little bit about why this project to begin with. So through Global Kids experience and badging work, we realized that, as I'm sure a lot of you realize, that there are many skills that our youth learn throughout their involvement in Global Kids and in many other programs, but they had no way of talking about it. So for that student who makes a lot of cool YouTube videos, but then doesn't know necessarily how to show that when it comes time to apply for an internship or write a college essay. So there were so many skills that our youth were learning and gaining, so many programs that they were a part of, but they didn't know how to talk about what they learned and then how to represent that when it came time to applying for a job, so to speak. So so we decided, in conjunction with the Hive Learning Network, and a lot of organizations were experiencing the same thing, to build out a Hive badging system. So for the first year of our grant, we would support 21 organizations in New York City and 7 organizations in Chicago at a minimum, and we would reach upwards of 2,000 youth. That means 2,000 youth logging into the system, and then we would also, within the system, which is Learning Times Badge Stack system, Hive organizations would be able to create their own groups within the Hive system. So there's one system where all the Hive members are a part of, and they each have their own groups, and they can build out their own groups, and within those groups make decisions about what kinds of badges they want, whether or not they want them to be public or private, and a whole host of other options. We would hold trainings in both cities and meetings, and continue to have ways for people to communicate their questions and concerns. And then also Global Kids would be a model with our own badges about global citizenship and civic engagement, and also with a youth advisory board that can really help us think through how the system can best fit youth's needs. And that photo on the right is a group of youth that we met with last year that helped Global Kids design our badging system. So the process for Hive New York, going into how do you even begin building a badging system for a network? So of course we start off with what we already know, our own experience and what we've done with badging work within Global Kids. And then we knew we would have to hear from members to hear what their needs were, what questions they had, what challenges they had, sort of to gauge the temperature of what people were feeling. Because when we had our first meeting, we really had no idea. And so we actually made a survey that asked people, where they were in their thinking about badges, which I'll share in the next slide. We knew we also needed to have certain expectations for communication. So in addition to our trainings, we built a Google site for everybody to be able to contribute to post resources, for us to post relevant links, and for every organization, if they want, to build out their own page on that Google site to share their work. But what we didn't know is what social practices would develop. For example, would people start noticing common themes within their organizations, like, for example, museums that are focused on science? And would those museums or organizations that had content areas that were similar, would they start coming together and create badges together? Or would people sort of go off on their own and do their own thing? Or would there be more focus on network-wide badges? So we didn't really know what would come, what those things would be. And then we also didn't know how quickly members would take to the system. Would some people just start right away? Or, is it for some people something a year, 2 years down the line? So in terms of what our trainings actually consisted of, we talked about in our first meeting the what and why of badges, which for some people, they were already there. They had been thinking about badges, and for a lot of people it was really new. And so we also talked about 6 ways of looking at badging systems. And I can't remember now, Cheryl, if this was one of the links that you sent out, but if not, I can share it out afterwards. But Barry initiated a document that is about 6 ways of looking at badging systems that everybody can contribute to. And our trainings also consisted of hands-on tour of BadgeStack, so getting people an account, getting them to sign up, putting them in a sandbox to play around with it, and then developing their own organizations groups. And then getting even more detailed, we then talked about, we developed a guide on how to actually develop badges and missions based off of BadgeStack. And most recently, since we beta tested the system this past summer with 3 of our Global Kids youth programs, we were able to talk about those experiences and what we learned. And we had a report that came out of that, which I'll also be sharing about later. We talked about integrating badges into workflows. And of course, in every meeting, leaving time to hear from members. What are their concerns? What are their challenges? And in general, just where they were with badges. In our first meeting, before we met, we sent out a survey that asked organizations to describe their current relationship with badging systems. And out of, I believe it was 20 or so organizations who answered that survey, you can see that 35% said we've already run something like a badging system. 40% said we've never run one, but have described one in a proposal. And 25% said we've never gone through a process to create one, but we're interested. So you can see that the range was, the range was pretty wide. It wasn't as if nobody knew or everybody knew a lot, but everybody was sort of in this middle ground. And we knew, and we said this from the very beginning, that it's a learning process for everybody. So even though Global Kids has done a lot of work on badges, we weren't saying by any means that we had the answers. So these are just some images from our trainings. Top left was our first training where we presented on the what and why of badges. We also gave opportunities for other organizations to present their work. So on the upper right-hand side, you see someone from the Museum of Natural History presenting about their badge work. And we would have different members come up. And then the bottom is an example of just some of the thinking that we would do. This one just straight on our whiteboard. What are some of the things that people wanted to badge over the summer? And so we had 4 organizations: The Point, New York Public Library, Global Kids, etc. Thinking through that. So what came up as we were going through our trainings and hearing from members? Well, some folks were wondering how the system could support cross-organization programs and events. For example, every year there's an annual Youth Media and Digital Technology Festival called Emoticon. There's another similar festival called the Digital Waves Festival. And then there's big Hive-sponsored events where Hive really has a presence, such as Maker Faire. So, people started asking us, how can we build out badges for these, one-time events or conference-like events? Another question that came up were common themes among organizations in the network. So I believe it was our 2nd or 3rd meeting. We have organizations that have similar content areas, whether that's in science, art, history, writing, or civic engagement. So how could those organizations meet together to create, let's say, badges that are focused on visual literacy and art? And then also, now there arises 3 kinds of needs for badges. There's the network-wide badge. So for Hive NYC or Hive Chicago, what's the badge that's going to go across all organizations? And then there's the organization-wide badges, like what Global Kids is building, which is for all of our youth programs. But then there's also the program-specific needs. For example, that one-year game design program that some folks might be running, or now with Hive Fashion grantees, those will be one-time short-term programs. So there's needs to badge all those different levels, network, organization, and program. So those are some of the things that came up. Now, what are some of the big questions that people had? So how do youth participate in individual programs and also access network-wide badges? Should badges primarily be motivators or retroactive rewards? And for this question, it's really about, as I've started meeting with Hive New York to build out a cultural traveler badge for the network, the question is, for the youth who are already very involved in Hive events and Hive organizations, are badges retroactive rewards for how involved they've been? Or should the cultural traveler badge really be about allowing youth to carve out a brand new pathway that they haven't yet before, to motivate them to be involved on a level that they haven't been before? So that's a question that we've been talking about, and we're both leaning towards badges as motivators, because we really wanted to badge activities that in the network that don't exist yet. Another question is how to avoid over-badging. What are pathways youth can take within the network? What network behaviors should be badged? And should the network be an overall badge provider? So I will address some of these big questions, not all of them, but just some of how we unpacked these questions. So to the question about what are pathways that youth can take within the network, we've begun to develop some user case stories. So one case story, or 2 actually, are for youth who are already really involved, and so the badge is a way for them to sort of level up, so to speak, and see even additional things that they can do. But these are for youth who are already part of an organization and go to a lot of events. Then there's that young person who comes to one Hive sponsored event but really doesn't know what the Hive is. They might go to one of the summer code parties or to Maker Faire, but aside from attending, they have no concept that it's part of a larger network. And then there are the youth who already have a lot of interest in a specific thing, whether that's art or video production, and through the encouragement of adult mentors, they decide to pursue a badge or join organizations' programs. To the question of how do we avoid overbadging, for New York right now, we are only thinking about one network-wide badge, and that's the Cultural Traveler Badge. But it will take many missions or quests to earn that badge. So while there's only one badge, there's many, many options for youth to choose from in terms of the missions can complete to earn that badge. But it has to be more than one because we're trying to get youth to be involved in many different areas. And so we'll say out of 10 missions, youth need to complete 6 of them to earn the Cultural Traveler Badge. To the question of what network behaviors should be badged, there are some key values and behaviors that are important for the networks. Things such as, a youth being imaginative, curious, a pattern finder, a problem framer, experimental, collaborative, etc. But we realize that a lot of these values or skills are soft skills that might be hard to badge. However, perhaps there's a way to show these skills, whether they're hard skills or soft skills, through a mission that's very specific. So, for example, Zakia participates in a skill share. She collaborates with other youth, demonstrates how to code, and frames the problem. So now we have a student who's sharing what she knows, but through sharing what she knows, we've identified that she's collaborative, that she's framing a problem, that she's curious, but there's also another skill she's learning, which is a coding skill. So this is something that we're developing now, all these user stories that match up to key values and behaviors of the network. Okay, so in addition to the network-wide badges, there are Hive members in New York who are either interested in or have begun developing program-specific badges. Global Kids, New York Public Library, the YMCA, The Point, Cooper Hewitt, and the Brooklyn Public Library are just some of them. And I want to talk a little bit about, or Joliz is actually going to talk a little bit about Global Kids program-specific badges because it really can be, the process that we've gone through, a model for how other organizations can build out their program-specific badges.
Okay, so hey everyone, this is Joliz, and it's not going through. Okay, here we go. So Global Kids, we developed a set of badges in our own system that we beta tested this summer. The way we were looking at badges are through 4 different frames where we have 4 different type of achievement badges, as Daria was talking about, where we have hard skills, soft skills, participation, and knowledge badges that all lead to one big role badge. So we'll show you some of the constellation from the programs that we used. So the first program that we did a project on was a virtual video project. We had 5 badges available for students. It was a 2-week program, so students were able to earn the badges depending on the group they were in. There was less of a ability to move through different learning paths in this section. However, our second program that we're going to show you, and we're going to talk a little bit more about actually, is Race to the White House, which was the program on geocaching. And this program had a varying number of different badges students can earn, and it allowed them to develop their own learning path depending on what they were interested in. Now, this was a program over the summer, also 2 weeks, and they essentially did geocaching, which is where they would find these caches around local parks in New York, and using different election topics that they had decided amongst themselves, they put in trackables for people to find and move to a different location. And the idea of it being Race to the White House is the trackable that was led to the closest to the White House by Election Day, which would be 2 weeks from now. It would be the issue that people feel is the most important. to them for the selection. So the students chose 4 different issues, and in this program they had an ability to learn different skills such as research, critical thinking, and as you can see, those are the 4 different types of achievement badges we have available, which lead to the big civic geocacher badge. So by earning, by doing different missions, they were able to earn a different combination of badges that would lead to a role badge. So what we want to talk about, though, is the responses we got when students decided to apply for different badges. The difference between what students talk about within the program and what they talk about during the badges is that badges allows them to give them a different type of vocabulary to talk about the skills that they've learned. The idea is, the students also, as part of this program, blogged and talked about, oh, today I went to the park and it was fun and we did this and that, and they were very, it wasn't as reflective as it was when they would go for a specific badge. So for example, as you can see here, students who were applying for these different badges were getting more in depth and using the language provided to talk about what they learned. So for example, the Park Explorer badge, the student said that the parks that I'm used to attending either have basketball courts or a football field. Geocaching allowed me to travel and visit new parks and view different areas of the park. For critical thinking, they were talking about you have to think about all the what ifs and ands or buts. You think about all the good and the bad causes. You have to break it down, get other people's point of view so you're not closed-minded. And you can see that they're being mindful about their responses, and they're thinking about how is it that the work they did within the program actually allowed them to learn that skill that they're trying to earn for this badge. The next slide you'll see is you see that this is an example of 13 youth earning a total of 48 badges. 13 of the 18 offered badges were achieved, and it averaged about 3 to 4 badges per youth, about 1 badge per week. And this was just during our beta test. This is looking at all 3 programs we did over the summer, by the way. And one of the things we wanted to test is whether their badging system would support them to build their own learning pathways. And I'm going to show you the next slide. Here are 3 youth who earned the most badge. All got 6 badges, but there are 6 different badges. I think there's only 1 badge that they share amongst the 3 of them, which is a professionalism badge. But you can see that they all chose their own learning pathway, despite the fact that these 3 youth were in 2 of the same programs. So you can see where their interests lied. So if we move on. So this is, yes.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to jump into that point. So for Hive New York, as we build out a cultural traveler badge with many different missions, this kind of tracking of students' pathways is something that we want to see within the Hive as well. So are they going to be choosing the same 6 missions to get that cultural traveler badge? Are they taking all different ones? So that's something that we'll be interested in tracking as we build out the Hive NYC badge. So some challenges that arose, and this is, it's safe to say, across both Hive New York and Hive Chicago. So one of the first challenges has been getting members to a, quote, comfortable spot. And comfortable can mean very different things for different organizations based off of where they are. For some, they just want to know more, but they're not ready yet to dive into the system. For others, they are in the planning phases right now, and they will do something in 2013. And then there are a few other organizations that have been doing a lot of thinking, have spent a lot of staff resources, have involved a lot of their staff resources, and they're just ready to really start using the system. For Hive New York, I would say that it's been a lot more about just trying things out, and then that's why we did the beta test over the summer, and then seeing seeing what we needed to change. For Hive Chicago, I would say there's been a lot more sort of theoretical conversations. So it's been two different approaches, and neither one is right or wrong, but it's interesting to see that the two networks have taken different approaches to building out the badge system. Another challenge is both the strengths and the limitations of the system. So as I mentioned before about the what came up, a lot of these cross-Hive one-time events was something that's come up since since we started using the system. So there have been just more discussions about how can the system support these types of events, whether they're conferences or festivals that bring together a bunch of Hive organizations, and we imagine that many more of those scenarios will continue to arise in the future. And then going back to our big questions, those are always things that are in discussion. So some of them are more challenging than others, but just based off of the needs of the organizations, and also for Hive New York, what their ultimate goals are, for getting youth to see these different pathways within the network. Those are things that we're continuing to discuss.
So speaking of the work that we've done in Chicago, like New York, we started in the same way where we did these several sessions talking about why badging and how global kids approach badging, and also just reminding people that, despite the fact that we have been doing this a while, it doesn't mean we have all the answers. And this is a very iterative process where where their opinions and their thoughts are also valued in this. So as Daria was talking about, in Hive Chicago, a lot of the conversation has been really theoretical in terms of what does it mean to have a network-wide badge. And it seems like the interests of the network as a whole, while some of the groups are thinking about program-specific and organization-specific badges, but their focus seems to be on creating these network-wide badges. So if we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So from one of the working sessions, they came up with a list of what their Hive badges would have to reflect. So first is a high degree of credibility. So they're talking about having skilled mentors and professionals, real-world skills with a recognizable value, an expectation of high-quality evidence, demonstrating time and effort worthy of a badge, and relevant and consistent criteria for granting, and designs that limit and discourage opportunities for gaming the system. So so obviously you can see that in each section that they've brought up, they're bringing a lot of they're being very thorough about and intentional about what their badges should be. So they want each badge to have clarity of content and intent, who judges this evidence, what are the next steps and connections to other experiences, the general amount of effort required to earn a badge, requirements for success, and what's the process going to be like submitting the evidence. And then they also want to make sure that they have a clear orientation to youth, to make sure that they're thinking about the interests of the youth and their goals, and including them in the badge creation process, and developing their youth identity and their competencies going through this system. They also want to have a demonstrable relevance, and connect it to real-world activities, and link it to things that transcend individual content areas. They want to align with 21st century skill sets, and especially Common Core, which I'll talk about later. One of the organizations that beta tested made sure that their badges were able to connect with Common Core standards. And they also don't want it to be some trendy thing that's flavor of the month. They want their badges to actually mean something. They also want connectivity in multiple dimensions. They want within Hive for youth to move between organization experiences and allow organizations to collaborate on badges. They want to link other youth to other experiences within Chicago, and ideally leveraging that infrastructure to support things such as passes for different events. And also between individuals, they want to connect youth to professionals, communities, and peers with similar interests. And across badges, they want to make pathways between badges and experience evident and are easy to act on. And they also, despite all these theoretical points, they also want it to be very simple and easy to use. They want to make sure that that the vetting is and the quality of evidence, the students are able to present the work that they've done for this badge in an easy way. They want it to also be easy for the people who are going to be verifying these badges to understand what they're doing, knowing what the next steps are. And they want to formally apply for funding related to badge development and badge management. So they also want supportiveness and inclusion. They want easy entry for new participants as well as regular users. Some of the Hive organizations were talking about having badge stack integrated into their websites, which is one of the asks that may not be possible. But it's thinking about what's the easiest way to get students in and into the system and earning these badges. And they want to make sure that they have the ability to keep badges private or make them public. They want an environment that allows people to fail in a safe and unintimidating way. You know, it's the idea of being able to defer a badge when a student applies for a specific badge. For example, this past summer in our own beta test, one of the students was applying for a badge that they weren't exactly hitting all the points that we were looking for when we wrote up our rubric. And the deferral process in the system allows you to defer the badge and tell the student why they haven't earned it yet. And the student is allowed to reapply as often as they like. And in this particular case, the student applied more than 3 times for the same badge, understanding each time that she was changing different things and adding more evidence as to why she should earn this particular badge. And it didn't turn into an antagonistic relationship with us, because she was just like, I really want to earn this. She took ownership of the fact that this was something that she was looking to do. She was extremely motivated about it. So it was a wonderful thing to see. Going back to Chicago, they want to have exploration and experimentation and have students have a highly skilled achievement. And they were thinking also they want badges for mentors and educators as well as youth, you know, to also think about badging teachers, badging their own staff. And they want their badges to reflect a respect for communities, support the values of youth, support the values of the member organizations and the Hive communities, and reward reinforcement and reward and reinforcement of important and social norms and practices. They also want a system-wide transparency. They want to ensure that the badge examples from different organizations are public to serve as examples and inspirations. They want to share youth by fostering opportunities and engaging them across programs and organizations. And they want to encourage organizations to share badge content and structure with full expectation that they will get credit for their contributions. So they want to make sure that everyone who's involved in the process, you know, we're sharing amongst each other and learning from one another. So if we can move on to the next slide. So right now I'm going to talk about some organization-specific badges. This summer, 3 organizations attempted to do a beta test. One was unable to get started. Another hadn't written their curriculum yet when they had said that they were going to do a beta test. Radioactive was the one that was able to successfully launch a beta test program. And here you see in the photo Adriana from Radioactive talking about their summer success, which one of the big things that came out of it was she was talking about that once students understood what badges were about, they really got it and they were quick to learn to get onto the computer and understand it, but that the instructors need to be intentional when integrating badges and badge stack into their activities. And youth need to be motivated and engaged to see the value of participating in this process. And we can also share the report that Adriana gave us on how badges went for them for this summer, but it was a really, really great process, and she had a lot of great feedback to share. So for this next year, organization-wide, there are 9 organizations that have committed to developing a badge system for this school year. Most of them are going to be starting in January, actually, but obviously you can see that Radioactive is on the list, also Project Exploration, Adler Planetarium, Now is the Time, which is actually a collaborative project in Hive Chicago using different organizations, the Museum of Science and Industry. So as you can see, it's a varying types of organizations. They're not all from the same area, and it's looking to be a really exciting year to see what they come up with. So the big questions that came from Chicago is how can badges be best linked across programs and organizations? Like Daria was talking about, that seems to be the big one. How can we make it so that in BadgeStack we can share badges? What's the best way to collaborate on creating multi-organizational badges? They were already, when we had our session where they were asked to make a badge, organizations were already grouping themselves together, coming up with badges that would count across their organizations. So, you know, some science organizations were getting together and seeing what are some of the similar skills that their students can have, and they want to know how that would look doing it on BadgeStack. What's a good process for reviewing and rewarding badges to reduce undue burden on mentors and evaluators? That's a big question because, you know, this is a lot of time that we have to invest as organizations to ensure that this is a successful process. What's the right range of granularity to reward with badges, and what are some good ways to identify and model community norms with badges? So that's what's coming out of Chicago.
All right, so there's a lot of reports and relevant studies that we can share. Over the summer, Global Kids beta tested the system in 3 of our programs, and we came out with a summer badge beta report that I know Cheryl linked to in the email that she sent. Another report that we can share is actually, I see that Sam Abramovich is on, so you know, feel free to jump in since you wrote this report. But a group of researchers from the University of Pittsburgh, you know, researched our badging project at the Epstein School in Atlanta, the one where we were building out badges for their 6th and 7th graders. And I do just want to share one slide on that. That I think is really important, and that when we shared it in our last Hive training, people found incredibly useful. So they came out with 5 aspects of interest for good badge design. So this means things that students, you know, that we should keep in mind in building any badging system, things such as enjoyment and independence for youth. So, you know, EBS stands for the Epstein Badging System, so just taking that first row, enjoyment and independence, students perceive badges as fun. Students liked having choices in terms of the type and level of their participation. So these are things that students identified, and then relevance to badging system for that. Go back to that. There we go. Relevance to badging systems, identify and maintain fun aspects of badges and allow participants to select badges and the means to earn it. Another thing would be, I'll jump to personal connection. So the system allowed for students to connect their out-of-school activities with their academic pursuits, and it allowed them to choose badges that had personal significance to them. So they earned things that were based on, that had appeal to them. And so relevance to any badging system that you design, you know, badges should include non-school based pursuits, should have direct relevance to students' interests, and students should have the ability to choose amongst the methods to earn the badge. So again, we found this incredibly useful, and we, you know, hopefully can share the full report soon with everyone, but just things to keep in mind for any good badge design. So that is it from us, and we've done a lot of talking. It's always a challenge to make these webinars very dialogic, but we'd love to open it now for any questions that people might have.
Thank you guys both. I think just judging from the activity in Chatzy that there's going to be a lot of questions, but we do have people in mute, so there will be some awkward silence as we let you guys come forward and ask questions. We've had the workshop, so we know that everybody likes everybody. So, feel free to ask questions.
You can raise your hand and go to meeting. This is Ruby. Just raise your hand, and I'll unmute you. Hopefully that will be what you're raising your hand about.
We do have one quick question from Cal about whether or not we can leave the last slide up. I'm guessing, Cal, are you talking about the one before this contact us slide, or are you talking about the contact us one?
Cheryl, do I need to unmute somebody? Is that Cal Sharif?
The good badge elements, if we could go back one slide. I'm getting a request from Cal to show that one again. And I think there was a question earlier from Sunny, or maybe it was Carla, about whether or not these slides are ones that we can share with the group.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure, I do have a question. Is there, how do I, I should know this, how do I see the Chatzy activity?
Oh, okay, it's at chatzy.com/DML comp.
Ah, thanks.
We did have one question earlier while you were talking from Bob Starr about maybe you could talk a little bit about the specific aspects of gaming the system that you were concerned about.
Concerned?
Yes, like what would be an example of the kids gaming your system?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I might have misspoken. I meant that the system is gamified. Um,
Oh, okay.
that it's a way for, sorry, I'm hearing echo on my end. That it's a way for students to be able to give us substantive assessment in a gamified way, because students are earning these badges by doing these missions, and it turns into a fun process for them. And I mean, I think, and Daria said earlier, it's about them being able to have language to talk about the issues that about the skills that they've earned, but it's also a way for us to have an assessment of the programs that we're running in a really substantial way that we haven't before as an organization that's in an informal learning environment.
Great. Bob, if you have any follow-up to that, just let me know or ask your question. I'm not sure if people had time to read the report, the beta report that came out this summer. I looked through it just before the webinar, and I'm curious, you talk about one student who didn't participate. It seemed like didn't participate at all. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about what was going on with that student. Did I read it correctly?
I mean, I think I don't think it was anything in particular that was up with the student. I think it was just, we gave him, oh, she just wasn't feeling it, as Barry said. Like, I mean, we gave them the choice. We didn't make it a mandatory thing for anyone. We allowed them time to do badges, but she chose to blog instead.
Okay. I know one of the things that I've been really excited about, and it seems like from the Chatzy activity that others were also seeing this, to be able to look and see what the choices for the learning pathways were that different students had. I really like that you can basically look for your strengths or your interests within this bigger pathway. And it sounds like I mean, obviously with it being informal, there was no punitive aspect of that for a student that didn't want to engage with the badge system, and I'm curious how that would play out in a mandatory K-12 classroom setting, you know, if there's some other way. It's one of those things that is probably going to have to get worked out right inside the classroom and how a teacher might manage that. But one of the things that's so nice about the badge systems is the ability to choose and have some agency. So I actually like that there was an outlier in your report, that there was somebody who said, you know, it's just, I'm not feeling it and I'd like to do something else. I think that's great.
Yeah, and actually, you know, Epstein is a good example of, for global kids, every student is going to have the choice of whether or not they want to participate in the badging system, and we're never going to make it mandatory, especially because we don't want it to feel like school. But you know, for Epstein School, they were able to give students just a lot of different choices, and it's still not mandatory, even within the school. So there's definitely a group of students who love going for the badges, and then there are some who aren't as interested, or maybe just will start it but not finish it. But even for them, within a school setting, they didn't make it mandatory either. But they found that there's other ways to get students involved who may not be as interested, and part of that is recognizing those students who earn badges in a public school assembly, and again giving them a lot of different choices both in and out of school to earn a badge.
So, hey, this is Carla. The one thing that I wanted to talk about was actually the same idea about the pathways, is that recognizing, I think that the slide that was most resonant for me, or one of the most resonant for me, was actually the one where you showed the multiple pathways and indicated that people actually chose totally different pathways, and yet they were involved in the same area. And I'm wondering if it might be useful, because that visualization alone, I think, tells a lot of stories about how kids are or the learning that's happening is interest-based, and people choose different pathways. Do you have that fleshed out from the whole cohort? Like, is it? Have you drawn conclusions based on that?
We just fleshed it out for the 3 students who earned the most badges. So we haven't done that for all the students who are part of our summer program yet. But I do agree with you that that's something that is important for us to know, is whether there are some things that some students are going for more. But in that particular case, I think, as Joliz mentioned, only one badge they all had in common. And that might have been one that was a more low-hanging fruit, and then from there they were all different.
Yeah, it was the professionalism badge.
I have a couple questions here in Chatty. I can just read them out loud. I know you can see them, but since we're recording it, not everybody will be following along in Chatty. So unless somebody's getting ready to unmute themselves, I'll just go ahead. From Ross, do you think it would be enough choice if some elements of the program were mandatory and badged while others were optional and badged, or is choice all or nothing? Did you guys find that in your systems?
I think what makes I think that's depending on what are the goals of your program, and what are you looking to get out of the badging system, because there are portions that we didn't talk about, like we have this concept of power-ups, of things students can earn if they were to unlock certain badges. And the idea is, if we were to implement that as mandatory, does that mean students who aren't involved in the badging system can earn those same things? Like, for example, going on trips and different things students can earn from unlocking a badge. I think with informal learning spaces in particular, making badges mandatory would kind of, I don't know, Daria, I don't know if you would agree, but it just would be counterintuitive to the idea of it being an informal learning space, and a space where students can find their own learning pathways.
Yeah, I agree with Joliz, which isn't to say that it can't work if there's elements that are mandatory. We just haven't done that, so if other people do, we would love to hear how that works out.
We do have another question from Michelle. I know it's a bit choppy. That wasn't a very good segue, but Michelle's asking if you think earning badges has to be gamified to be effective.
I think in its essence they're gamified without even trying to be. Because of the way it's set up. I mean, students student in order to earn more badges, they have to do missions. It's just the language that we've chosen to work with. When we had our youth committee, they were talking about, you know, the fact that we use language like power-ups and unlocking unlocking quests, and that we're calling it missions. It's all in the way that we're presenting the language. So yeah.
I think, you know, I'm just following the chat. See, so you know, a lot of badges have those roots in the gaming world, and when we introduce badges in our sessions with youth, we often ask, what are some other examples of badges out there? And you know, aside from Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and the military, one of the first things they always say is games, and so that's also a really good reference point for them to wrap their minds around what badges are, and then now shifting it over to, you know, an educational context.
Sam, did you want to unmute and talk a little bit about what you found in your, we've been having a lot of great discussion in Chatsy about Sam's research paper that isn't published yet. So if you want to join us for a couple seconds.
Yeah, hi, great. Thanks for inviting me in, and I'm sorry I'm late. So just to be very clear, though, there's two pieces of research here. There's the, like for instance, the good badge design was part of research that was conducted on Epstein, where there was a lot of interesting things learned from that. But then there's also additional research that's related to our DML team, where we found some other themes just because of the different opportunity to find research there. Regarding this kind of last question, I think that my own thoughts have been that gamification is kind of related to the smaller type of badge, or the motivation badge, rather than kind of the badge which serves as a representation of mastery of skill or knowledge. In some of our research, we found that kind of those more badges that you could maybe possibly classify as gamification tended to have a negative effect on students' motivation. And by negative, I meant that there was an increase in their kind of what an achievement goal theory is called performance avoidance. They're worried that they're not earning enough badges, that they're not learning enough, that they will be the person in their group who earns the least amount of badges. Whereas badges that kind of represented mastery or skill, mastery of knowledge or mastery of skill, increased kind of a student's expectation for success, which is known to be a very reliable predictor for learning later on. But to kind of bring that back to Epstein, was that, and Global Kids' work, is that students were perceiving the badges as fun. So to kind of, you know, say, well, badges aren't kind of game related, or they're not, you know, a type of gamification, seems premature. Because the idea of choosing the level of participation, allowing students to choose which badge they wanted, which are all kind of, you know, inherent qualities of good games, was some of the things that in the Epstein badge system were hallmarks of students' participation and success with it. So, you know, it's the academic cop-out, but there's no specific answer. It's just complicated.
Great, thanks, Sam. And guess what? It's time is up. But we're going to do this again in a month on November 13th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. We have our next webinar, and I think it's going to be around Common Core, Open Badges, Learning Registry Metadata Initiative with Peter Pinch and Greg Grossmeyer. They are trying to work with our schedule, so that date, hopefully they'll both be able to make it. But thank you both, Daria and Joliz, and everybody who participated in Chatsy and who came today. This was a great webinar. It's so great to connect the work that you're doing, because you really are, you've been doing this for so much, well, you guys have been doing it, I think, the longest in the MacArthur Foundation funded cohort. So thank you for sharing all your information with us, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.